They were not welcome. They were intruders, two men with anonymous faces who dared to challenge the Olympus of fashion. In Milan, where elegance was dictated like a dogma and a surname was worth more than blood, Domenico Dolce and Stefano Gabbana were heretics. No one was waiting for them. No one wanted them. Their first collection wasn't a debut. It was a public execution. Critics tore them apart without mercy. They were called provincial, vulgar, a mistake in bad taste. The lights went out, and all that remained was the echo of failure. Anyone else would have fled. They, instead, gathered the ashes, mixed them with rage, and lit a fire. They didn't dream of dressing crystal princesses. They dreamed of Sicilian widows wrapped in black lace, of women who prayed by day and sinned by night. They dreamed of sweaty bodies, of burning gazes, of a style that didn't ask for permission. It struck, it tore, it provoked. While the world praised minimalist purity, they spat excess. While others drew clean lines, they built an altar to desire, to pain, to contradiction. Dolce and Gabbana didn't enter fashion. They invaded it like a plague, violated it with passion, and forced it to turn toward them. And from that blasphemy, an empire was born. An empire that was never pure, never docile, never correct. Because Dolce and Gabbana are not a brand. They are a scar that still bleeds on the skin of fashion. Milan, the era of 1980. The city pulsed with the metallic rhythm of sewing machines and the elegant murmur of an audience that applauded only what was exclusive, perfect, and approved by the gods of fashion. In that world of steel and marble appeared Domenico Dolce, a quiet young man from Palermo, the son of a tailor who had learned to sew before he learned to write. His fingers knew the obedience of fabric, the discipline of thread, but deep inside he carried a secret, the desire to turn tailoring into theater. By his side stood Stefano Gabbana, a restless Milanese, provocative and bold, with the arrogance of someone unafraid of scandal. The son of a modest family, he had rebellion in his eyes. He didn't want to repeat formulas. He wanted to detonate traditions. When they met, it wasn't a gentle encounter. It was a collision. One brought precision, the other fire. The combination was explosive. But Milan had no room for intruders. The elite saw these two young men as imposters who had crossed an invisible border. The city does not forgive those without a name or lineage, and they were nobodies. In 1985, they launched their first collection. They called it Real Women. They didn't choose supermodels with endless legs. They chose friends, acquaintances, imperfect bodies that walked with more truth than glamour. On the runway, those women looked like they had stepped out of another world. Sicilian widows draped in mourning, skirts hugging their hips, eyes that defied the Nordic purity that dominated the fashion of the moment. The result was brutal. Critics annihilated them. They were called provincial, grotesque, vulgar. No one wanted to buy. The silence in the room was more lethal than a scream. The press didn't dedicate a single line. What was meant to be a debut felt more like a burial. Domenico and Stefano returned home, empty-handed and heavy with debt. They had mortgaged their future for a vision that seemed to have no place in the world. The temptation to give up was real. Many friends advised them to stop, to find stable jobs, to abandon the madness. But they weren't built for resignation. Humiliation, instead of extinguishing them, ignited a furious fire. That night, in a small apartment surrounded by rejected sketches and unpaid bills, they made a vow. If they don't want our world, we'll force it to exist, they said. And in that secret pact, in that shared fury, the true heart of Dolce & Gabbana began to beat. Failure didn't bury them. It pushed them toward a dark mirror where they saw themselves stripped of all masks. In Milan, they would never be accepted. The city was too clean, too minimalist, too perfect for their dirty dreams of lace, sweat, and desire. If they wanted to survive, they had to turn their gaze back to what truly burned in their veins. Sicily. Sicily is not just an island. It is a theater of shadows and light, of widows dressed in black walking through religious processions, of balconies where women watch men with eyes of fire. It is the land of repressed Catholicism and explosive eroticism, of mourning and celebration, of silence and gunfire. Sicily was pure contradiction, and that contradiction became their flag. Domenico had known it since childhood. He had watched his mother embroider black lace for funerals, and the same women wear those dresses as weapons of seduction on summer nights. Stefano understood immediately that there was dynamite in that. What Milan called vulgarity, they would call identity. What critics dismissed as provincialism, they would turn into myth. Thus was born the Vedova Siciliana, the Sicilian widow, an archetype that would forever define their style. Tight dresses that clung to the hips like possessive hands, corsets that compressed breath until it became a moan, black lace that seemed to weep and sin at the same time. Their models were no longer fairy tale princesses, they were women of flesh and fire, women who could pray the rosary with their lips and use those same lips to burn a lover. In a world obsessed with pure lines, Dolce and Gabbana offered overflowing curves. While Paris preached distant elegance, they offered immediate, almost obscene sensuality. Their Sicily wasn't a geographic place, it was a manifesto, a scream against the tyranny of purity. The response was different this time. Italy, which had first dismissed them, began to look at them with curiosity. On the runway, their women didn't look like mannequins, they looked alive, dangerous, irresistible. The public, accustomed to the Nordic chill of minimalism, found itself confronted with Mediterranean fire, and though the critics still whispered, the audience began to applaud. Each collection was a provocation. They weren't seeking acceptance, they were seeking confrontation. You want purity? Here's sin. You want silence? Here are screams. You want perfection? Here are scars. Dolce and Gabbana understood that their strength lay in never asking for permission, and the deeper they sank into Sicily, the higher their name rose. The transformation was irreversible. They were no longer designers seeking a place in Milan. They had become prophets of a dark gospel, one that turned opulence into sensuality, mourning into desire, rejection into power. And suddenly, without ever softening their rebellion, Italy began to kneel before them. The echo of Sicily could no longer be contained on an island. What began as a murmur among Italian critics became a roar that crossed borders. Dolce and Gabbana had found their voice a language of excess, of flesh, of lace, and that language, incomprehensible to many in Milan, began to seduce the world. The spark that ignited the explosion came through a woman who feared nothing, Madonna. It was 1990. The queen of pop, always hungry for provocation, needed a wardrobe that could scream louder than her music. She wasn't looking for dresses, she was looking for erotic armor. And she found it in Domenico and Stefano. Corsets, crucifixes, skirts that blended the sanctity of the altar with the sweat of the nightclub. Madonna didn't just wear them, she canonized them. With every concert, every magazine cover, Dolce and Gabbana ceased to be two rebellious Italians and became a global phenomenon. The world of entertainment surrendered. Hollywood actresses, singers, and socialites all wanted that dangerous mix of devotion and sin. The vibrant red of their dresses became a symbol of defiance. Black lace became a second skin on red carpets. The supermodels of 1990, Naomi, Linda, Claudia, walked like pagan goddesses dressed by them, embodying a sensuality that no longer apologized. While other designers competed for restrained elegance, Dolce & Gabbana built an empire of excess. Baroque embroidery, animal prints, corsets that stole your breath. Everything was too much. Everything was excessive. And precisely because of that, no one could look away. They were the antithesis of minimalism. Maximalism turned into religion. Their ad campaigns were just as provocative. They weren't photographs, they were cinematic scenes not meant for fragile souls. Women kneeling in churches, half-naked men with defiant stares, Sicilian families posing like glorified mobsters. Every image was dynamite. The public consumed them with fascination, the critics with outrage. But no one could ignore them. Milan's runways became theatrical rituals. These were not fashion shows, they were ceremonies of fire. The music pulsed like a heartbeat. The models appeared like apparitions, and the audience left hypnotized, disoriented, disturbed. Dolce and Gabbana weren't offering fashion. They were offering a universe, a journey into a world where sensuality and power blurred into one. And with every season, with every act of provocation, their empire grew. Boutiques in New York, Tokyo, and Dubai filled with devotees. The Sicily invented by Domenico and Stefano had gone global. What was once dismissed as vulgarity became luxury. What had once been rejection now sold for thousands of dollars. But with glory came shadow. The higher they climbed, the more enemies they made. The press accused them of toying with religion, eroticizing sacred symbols, trivializing Mediterranean culture. The fashion purists despised them for turning the runway into a carnival. Yet every accusation only made them stronger. Dolce and Gabbana had conquered the impossible, turning criticism into fuel, provocation into marketing, scandal into gold. And while Madonna and the supermodels lit up the world with their style, Domenico and Stefano watched from backstage with dark smiles. They knew their empire wasn't built on approval, it was built on transgression. That was how they went from being outcasts in Milan to becoming the new kings of global fashion. Uncomfortable kings, dangerous kings, but kings nonetheless. The fire that made them kings was the same one that lit pyres around them. Dolce & Gabbana didn't just build an empire of lace and excess, they built a battlefield. And on that battlefield, every provocation was a bullet. Every campaign a shot fired across the line between admiration and outrage. The first cracks appeared in their advertising campaigns. These weren't simple ads. They were calculated provocations, women kneeling before dominant men, scenes evoking mafia rituals, images that seemed to eroticize submission. What some called art, others called misogyny. And in an industry beginning to hear the growing echoes of feminism, the scandal multiplied. Newspapers wrote with fury. Activists protested, and yet sales kept climbing. But the true earthquake came later, with a commercial in China. A young Asian model struggled to eat pizza and pasta with chopsticks, while a male narrator mocked her awkwardness. What Dolce & Gabbana thought was humor, millions of Chinese saw as humiliation, a racist caricature, reducing an entire culture to a crude stereotype. Outrage detonated like dynamite. Celebrities tore up their contracts on camera, influencers destroyed D&G clothes in viral videos, and social media ignited with merciless fury. Within hours, Dolce & Gabbana had fallen from icons of luxury to cultural pariahs. And it wasn't an isolated incident. Controversial remarks about same-sex families, political comments that inflamed tensions, accusations of cultural appropriation, every statement from Domenico and Stefano seemed to slice deeper into their own brand. The modern world, hypersensitive, hyperconnected, was no longer forgiving. Cancellations piled up. Collaborations crumbled. The empire built on black lace began to tremble. The images were brutal. Crowds in Shanghai shouting against Dolce & Gabbana. Collections pulled from stores. Red carpets once gleaming with their gowns now replaced by a silence heavier than scandal itself. The same fashion world that had once celebrated them as rebels now dragged them into the public square as heretics. The most disturbing part was their reaction. At times, they apologized. At others, they withdrew their apologies, and sometimes They lashed out at their critics. It was a dangerous game, feeding controversy as if it were part of the show. But the cost was real. Millions lost. Markets closed. Collaborators fled as though escaping a burning building. Dolce & Gabbana had achieved the impossible to be loved and hated with equal intensity. Their dresses still graced the bodies of international stars, but their names were stained across headlines filled with rage. The contradiction was unbearable and yet hypnotic. How could they survive so many detonations? The answer lay in their nature. They had never wanted acceptance. They had never played the game of political correctness. Dolce & Gabbana were children of scandal, creatures born of controversy. Every wound made them bleed, but it also made them impossible to ignore. The world couldn't look away because the hate was fierce, but the fascination was stronger. And in that dark paradox, the most desired luxury brand and the most hated at once, the black legend of Dolce & Gabbana was forged. They weren't just designers. They were gladiators in a global coliseum where every mistake became spectacle and every criticism an inverted applause. Thus, between cheers and boos, between adoration and condemnation, Dolce & Gabbana wrote the darkest chapter of their story. And yet, it wasn't the end. Because even after the fire, even after the ruins, there was something within them that refused to die. The fire had burned everything to the ground. Markets closed, contracts shattered, fashion shows canceled. The brand that once dressed Madonna and the world's supermodels had become a global symbol of disgrace. Anyone else would have buried the name and started anew. But Domenico and Stefano were not anyone. They had never learned how to surrender. Amid the chaos, while social media demanded their extinction and influencers filmed themselves destroying their handbags, the two designers did the unthinkable. They kept working. While the world crucified them, they sewed. While boutiques pulled their products from shelves, they sketched new collections. It was like watching two men walking through a minefield, utterly unafraid of the next explosion. Their first response to the hate was something no one expected: defiant persistence. They didn't disappear. They didn't hide. They came back stronger. Their shows louder and more unapologetic. Every criticism became an inverted applause. They doubled down more Baroque embroidery, wilder prints, fiercer colors. Their message was unmistakable. We will not ask for permission. We will not dilute our language. But there were also cracks in the armor. In interviews, their voices trembled, half apology, half defiance. The wounds were visible. The world had bitten hard, and the blood was real. Yet that vulnerability became part of the spectacle. Even in hate, the audience couldn't look away. There was something tragically mesmerizing about watching two men fight against an entire universe. Their silent army of loyal followers also stood firm. Film stars, musicians, European aristocrats who never stopped wearing them, because beneath the scandal, the truth was simple: their clothes were still irresistible. Sensuality cannot be canceled. Desire does not obey algorithms. On red carpets, beneath flashes and paparazzi, Dolce & Gabbana continued to appear, wrapping famous bodies in temptation. Each photograph became a rebellion against the boycott, a reminder that even in cultural exile, allure was stronger than hatred. In time, they understood they could not erase the past, but they could transform their scars into marks of survival. They began speaking louder about their roots, their Italian pride, their rise from nothing. The story shifted. They were no longer villains, they were survivors. And in that narrative, they found air to breathe again. Dolce & Gabbana did not resurrect by apologizing. They resurrected by defying. Their resilience was brutal, imperfect, contradictory, but it was real. They endured because they knew no other way to live but to fight. They endured because rejection was written in their DNA. They endured because, in the end, scandal also sells. And slowly, against all logic, they succeeded. They never regained their untouchable throne, but they didn't vanish either. They remain scars on the face of fashion, a constant reminder that resilience is not always purity. Sometimes, it's brutality. To survive, hatred is already an act of power. But Dolce & Gabbana did more than survive. They turned the wound into a signature, the scandal into identity. Their legacy is not clean, and it never will be. It is a legacy stained and fractured, yet precisely because of those cracks, it remains unforgettable. When we speak of Dolce & Gabbana, we are not merely speaking of clothes. We are speaking of a cultural universe that redefined what it meant to be Italian in fashion. While others exported classical elegance, Domenico and Stefano exported Sicilian contradiction, a fusion of faith and sin, mourning and desire, family and mafia. They built an image so powerful that even those who have never worn a single piece recognize the silhouette, the lace, the theatricality. Their impact on the runway is undeniable. They were among the first to transform female sensuality into an open manifesto, dressing real women with real bodies when the world still worshipped unattainable ideals. They gave the supermodels of the 90 seconds a stage where they ceased to be mannequins and became living goddesses. They proved that maximalism, when crafted with fury and devotion, could be as luxurious as minimalist purity. But their legacy also lives in the shadows. They taught the industry that scandal doesn't always destroy a brand, it can redefine it. Dolce & Gabbana became the uncomfortable example that in the age of cancellation, luxury can still survive if it becomes temptation. They are proof that fashion feeds not only on beauty, but also on controversy. And the future? The future of Dolce & Gabbana is a broken mirror, every fragment reflecting a different possibility. On one side, there are the young consumers who still see them as symbols of Mediterranean opulence. On the other, those who will never forgive their transgressions. In between lies the paradox, an empire suspended in permanent tension between desire and rejection. Today, Domenico and Stefano speak with the calm of men who have seen everything triumph and ruin, applause and disgrace. Yet behind every word still beats the same defiance. They do not seek redemption. They do not crave forgiveness. Their only obsession is to keep creating, keep provoking, keep leaving scars on fashion itself. And perhaps that is their true legacy. The lesson that fashion is not just beauty, it is conflict. That a dress is not just fabric, it is a declaration of war. That a name doesn't have to be pure to be eternal. Dolce & Gabbana will not be remembered as saints of elegance. They will be remembered as heretics who burned down the temple and from its ashes built their own cathedral. A cathedral baroque, sensual, contradictory, and indestructible. Dolce & Gabbana were never the legitimate sons of fashion. They were bastards who stormed its palace with their hands stained in lace and fire. Their story is not one of a clean ascent, but of a constant battle against disdain, mockery, and hate. And yet against every prediction they are still standing. From humiliation, they carved their own language. From Sicily, they took darkness and turned it into sensuality. From Madonna and the supermodels, they built altars of flesh and desire. And from the scandals, those bombs that would have destroyed anyone else, they forged scars that made them immortal. Dolce & Gabbana didn't build an empire with subtlety, they built it with dynamite. They didn't enter fashion by asking permission. They kicked the doors open. Every collection, every runway, every image was a brutal reminder that beauty can be dangerous, that luxury can be born from excess, that fashion itself can burn in contradiction. Today, when we see their name engraved above boutiques across the world, we don't see purity, we see controversy, we see contradiction, we see a broken mirror in which we all reflect. Desire, fury, scandal, fascination. Dolce & Gabbana are more than a brand, they are an uncomfortable myth, an open wound fashion never managed to heal. And perhaps that is why they remain alive. Because in a world that demands correctness, they chose error. In an industry obsessed with perfection, They chose the scar. And in collective memory, scars do not fade. They are remembered, worshipped, feared. Dolce and Gabbana are living proof that from the cruelest rejection can rise an eternal empire. An empire that does not apologize, does not kneel, and continues to burn like a fire no one can extinguish. That is their legacy. And that is the secret of their eternity.